Hello and welcome to Skeleton Songs.
Skeleton Snares.
Skeleton Snares. Why snares, Alexis?
Well, let me start by talking about the Elixir of the Devils.
Happy Christmas!
So our first season was all about Gothic literature, so we're going to revisit this.
Okay.
And as you know, being a alumna of the finest the finest English literature institution in the land, the Gothic tradition, before it sort of got quite po-faced, was sort of almost like farcical.
It had a lot of fun.
So like the Castle of Otranto with the giant helmets and everything.
It's unclear how much that was meant to be funny and how much that is now funny in 2021.
Well, I think that's the thing.
But like Carmela, the kind of showed enough on the news side of things, it really like lent into the kind of joy of being like, and then there was a body in the basement.
Exactly this. So this sort of berserk energy, unrestrained by good taste.
Great.
And this guy, E.T.A. Hoffmann,
who I've never read.
Who I've never read either. I don't know how. I looked for a couple of his things, and they both seemed to be entirely in German, which limited.
That's a blocker.
But he was a big deal in the beginning of the 19th century, and he inspired Poe and all sorts. And he wrote a book called The Elixir of the Devils, and it is as the youth would say 30 years ago, mental. And there's this monk, and he's
always starts with a monk.
He guards an elixir which was apparently abandoned by St. Anthony while St. Anthony was being tempted by devils in the desert, and this elixir was in a reliquary. And our monk is a great speaker, but he gets shy, and then he drinks the devil's elixir in order to get his rhetoric back, and it worked, but then things go a bit pear-shaped, and because his latent sensuality is awakened, so he starts falling in love with people and pretending to be Saint Anthony and all sorts.
Interesting.
And he leaves the monastery, or is thrown out, and he comes across he leaves the monastery because he's looking for the woman he's fallen in love with, and also the abbot throws him out because he's fallen in love with this woman.
You can't be doing that.
And he comes across this bloke sleeping by a cliff edge, which seems unwise, but this is what happens in Gothic literature. And he wakes the bloke up, and then sort of accidentally or on purpose, it's not really clear, pushes him into the ravine, and adopts his identity because this bloke looked very similar to him. And so he goes on as Greta's account, and he has an affair with the count.
Wait, it was a count who was sleeping by the
count,
ravine?
yes. An affair with the count's lover. But plot twist, the count's lover turns out to be the stepmother of the woman he'd fallen in love with.
This is exactly the sort of mental...
So he meets her, and then he meets the count, because of course the count didn't die. And why is the count so similar to him?
Because he's his brother?
Because he's his half-brother.
Right.
And
So it means actually it's his mother.
The stepmother of the woman he's fallen in love with is is the count's half-sister. I'm not clear whether it's his sister as well, because
this is so Gothic.
And then it all goes wrong, and he has to flee the castle, and he sort of bumbles around Europe, occasionally getting saved by this guy called Pietro Belcampo, or Peter Schoenfeld, which is basically the same in Italian and German. And every so often, like, the count who looks like him will murder somebody, he'll get blamed for it, or he'll murder somebody, and the count will get blamed for it. And then, one time the count murders somebody, he's about to be executed, the count turns up and says, "Ha ha, no, it was me, I'm going to laugh madly," and eventually goes back to the monastery and dies. And the account of his death says that he was laughing madly sort of as he died. So one interpretation is he's still possessed by the devil's elixir and didn't manage to master his lusts. And the other is like the count was nearby in a cupboard laughing hideously in order to... Anyway, but I was reading about this because...
that has no relevance to what I thought we were talking about today.
As you may remember, I have a small but perfectly formed collection of 17th century alchemy. I don't get quite incanabula, but early books. And as a result, I got an email from Abe Books this morning talking about the most expensive...
Show you some devil's elixir?
Talking about the most expensive sales they'd made this year.
All right.
Apparently sort of like, yeah, mate, you're nothing. You thought you spent all your savings.
What, they're selling Shakespeare's Quarto for £1 bazillion, are they?
The first edition of Dracula.
How much is that going for?
24 grand, actually. It's less than I expected, yeah. But still, a bit out of our price range. But they also are selling a letter from E.T.A. Hoffmann for about the same price as the first edition of Dracula. And the letter from E.T.A. Hoffmann is apologising to his editor for being late.
Mad? Oh, late.
Late. What do writers apologise to
yes, I'm
editors
sorry.
for?
Engaging brain now.
Yeah, it's you write to an editor or a publisher, you either apologise for being late, or you're complaining about
at the party,
or you're complaining about the royalties.
Or the royalties, yeah, that's true. The 3 letters. So again, this does not make it clear how you're going to link it back.
Well, now we have the comet-like returning parabola, because after I put out the last book, I got all enthusiastic and I thought I'd write another one. But this time,
for people who haven't heard about it.
Oh yeah, I wrote a book.
Yeah, Elixir wrote a book called Against World Building, which is a collection of his essays, which is on a variety
Against World Building and Other Provocations.
And Other Provocations, see what its full title, which is a collection of lots of different short essays Alexis has written for various game publications about various different facets of gaming. But you've now written a more concentrated, focused.
Yeah, well, after I put out Against World Building, people liked it, and some people said they wanted, well, thank you, more original material. So I thought I'll write, a book about what I think about games. But I inexplicably gave myself I gave myself a deadline because I thought I'll work towards it.
You're a man of enthusiasm, Alexis.
Yeah, and I thought, well, if it's 6 months, I can do a book in 6 months, and of course I could do a book in 6 months if I didn't already have 2 jobs. So,
what's the second one?
Sorry,
being an evil monk.
Being a dad. Yeah.
The old family card.
But seriously, I realised I'd bitten off more than I could chew in terms of the time, and also because I think I don't feel ready to write a grand uber work on what I think about games, because I'm only 12 years into my career and I want another 3 or 4 years.
But that doesn't mean that the book that you've written is bad, to be clear.
Well,
I think you want to sell it. I think what it means is that it's short and easy to read.
So I like the term piquant, or perhaps punchy. So yeah, so it's
just before you totally turn off anyone listening to this.
It's about 10,000 words of me saying very intently why we are glad we have played some games and we're not glad we played other games, and what as game designers we can do about it. And one of the big inspirations was this bloke, Christopher Alexander,
who I hadn't heard of before you mentioned him.
So I came at him from 2 angles. He's big in software development because he wrote a book called The Pattern Language, or with his team wrote a book called The Pattern Language in about the 70s, which detailed a number of consistent, likely solutions to common problems in architecture. Because if you're trying to do lots of things simultaneously, you often want to have sort of off-the-shelf solutions so you can concentrate on the interesting bits, the same way that you get screws in different standard sizes. You don't want to have to make your own screw.
I'm sorry, are you trying to explain something to me in terms of DIY and grub nuts? This is a long-running feud that Alexis and I have, and an otherwise very pleasant relationship.
So, colours.
Yeah.
If you had to invent a new name for a colour every time you did one of your...
Yeah, I wouldn't call it the grub nut.
But you wouldn't. But it's useful having green and orange and yeah. Here we go. It's useful having a colour wheel, isn't it?
Yeah.
So when I say to you, why do they put those blue eyes on that orange bloke? It looks mental.
Well, I said that's a good question because the cover of Dune from 1981 looked horrible.
Yeah, but you pointed out that the colour wheel has
complementary.
Yeah,
blue
and so
orange.
you have these common solutions, right? You find that you will tend to do complementary colours too,
yes.
Which I'd never heard of and which wasn't obvious to me, but is obvious to any graphic designer. But you don't sit down every time and think, what colour would go nice with this one?
Yeah.
You think here is a standard set of complementarities that I can use.
Yeah.
And a pattern language is like that, but writ large. If you have a public square, how big do you want to make it, and what sort of entrances do you want to it, and what do you expect it to do if you're planning a city?
Okay, thank you for explaining that in language I know.
And grub nuts. And the and so software development is really useful for because that sort of approach, because software development you often make a whole bunch of decisions in different directions. So you want to go back to an approach that you know works, which you can then tune, but rather than trying to reinvent the wheel every time. So design patterns in software engineering from the early 90s, I think, were quite influential. I think youth don't care for them anymore. But I
feel like architecture probably isn't.
No, but back to when software engineering now.
Oh right, sorry.
Yeah. So there's a bunch of design patterns which are sort of things you find yourself problems you find yourself trying to fix and common solutions for them that you want to use. So that's where I first came across Christopher Alexander. And then I ended up reading him when I was reading about structure and writing and architecture and things. He's hugely influential, although also quite controversial in archaeology, because some of his ideas are outre.
What are you going to say, because his buildings fell down?
No, he's a
brilliant mind.
He's an architect, not a structural engineer. He writes essays and draws things. But a city is not a tree, is this essay he wrote in the 60s where he pointed out the perils of careful categorisation and strict limits on how you design things, and that prevent you from finding useful connections between the sub-elements. God, that sounds dry. Read the book; it's less dry. Because I
can confirm it is less dry. It's in fact not dry at all.
Did I rip off his idea? I didn't rip off his idea.
No, not at all. You used it as a starting point because
and I keep quoting him.
So correct me if I'm wrong here, but the key thing you took away from Christopher Alexander's book is this idea of the tree structure. So I think when you start with an idea, whether it's in software or architecture or anything, it's a good idea to start at the top and work your way down. So you start with the key aspect of whatever you're planning, say for example a city, and you think, right, well this is the key element and that predicates the need for these two sub-elements, and those two sub-elements each need their different individual infrastructures, and so on and so forth, until you end up with a very sort of clear pyramidal structure of the big idea at the top and increasingly small but very important bits that support the higher bits up in the pyramid. And that's all well and good if what you're designing is just a sort of thought experiment or just something that looks like a lovely diagram on the page. But when you are trying to apply planning like that to something that is living, like a city, which is at once both, a bunch of boring brick and chemicals, but also a seething mass of humanity with all the complications that entails. Actually having a very simplistic, clear structure doesn't really work, because life isn't simple and clear and sensible. Life is complicated and installational. So your key thing, again, tell me if I'm wrong, is that the tree structure is fantastic, but it needs to come back to itself at the end. It can't just end from the top to the bottom.
Not just at the end, but along the way. So if you think about a school or a business, you might think, well, you got your year groups and you got your classes, and then you got your kids in the class. You're the tree. Or your business, you've got your divisions, and you got your departments, and you got your teams, and all the rest of it. But this. The team in the design department often wants to work with the team in the engineering department or development department, whatever, and so it doesn't work nicely in a tree. So you end up with all different sorts of different ways to manage this. This is a known and a problem in all kinds of endeavours, but you still get this sort of seductiveness of the central idea that everybody likes. Not everybody likes, especially us the best types, like the neat org charts where you can see who reports to who. And then sometimes, if somebody reports sideways or wants to talk to their mate in the department, then the managers or the lieutenant colonel's eyes will pop out of their head in outrage. And so that was the kicking off point. But really what I thought was, there are things that we know when we start to think about it make games tastier, more appealing or more exalting or more interesting, and yet we, and by we I include me, because I've made a lot of these mistakes, don't always do them. And that's because you get these temptations. A lot of ideas which aren't helpful are very appealing. There isn't nearly as strong a correlation between attractive, elegant ideas and useful ideas that produce good work as we think there are. So this is one of the reasons that Twitter is so outrageously useless as a place to get game design advice, which unfortunately it took me several years to realise, is because the ideas that flourish on Twitter are the ideas that sound sort of vaguely counterintuitive and clever, and that's how they spread. The ideas that are actually useful and have results don't necessarily flourish well on Twitter. Sometimes they will, because sometimes they'll sound appealing. But what I wanted to do was outline some of the appealing ideas that actually have traps inside them, after a whole bunch of stuff about Marmite.
Yeah, you just took opportunity to stick the knife in, didn't you? Just because I like Marmite and you hate fun.
Marmite, kids, not even once.
It's delicious. Do you want to talk about some of the traps, or shall we move on to a more general?
Let's move into more general,
well,
because I'll start listing. It'd be the snare of the tree all over again. Chapter 5.
Well, firstly, I have a lot of sympathy with the old linking the beautiful diagram to reality. I used to be a producer, but obviously now we're a team of two, it's just you and me. We don't really need production in the traditional form. But so much of a producer's life in games is about designing org charts and processes and plans that all make sense and all work and can be optimized to basically perfection. Like there are sort of processes that work and processes that don't work in a way that you don't really get in real life. And then you go to the team and you say, this is now the new process, or having listened to your feedback, this is how we can improve the whatever it is we're trying to do in this studio right now. And people, the best response you can hope for is people go, okay, I'll try that. and that's literally the best.
Yeah.
And the worst response you can get, which I think is probably the most common, is either just like, I'm not interested, I'm thinking about what I've got to write tomorrow or what picture I have to draw by the end of the month. But it just never works in the way that the sort of diagram intends it to, because people just do not fit into these perfect lattice structures. Even with the best people in the world, it just doesn't happen that way. So I'm very sympathetic to Christopher Alexander and the S-type intentions behind it, but I'm also painfully aware of the human side.
To be clear, Christopher Alexander was saying, this is a trap you can fall into. He wasn't saying you should design everything in a hierarchical taxonomy.
But I was going to ask you a question, because you have forbidden me from saying something about this book in public. And
I have, and I'm going to respond. I know what it is, so I'm going to just respond to something you said, and then
okay.
The question. Just in terms of the tree, that seduction of the process works, but then it lasts until it meets the real world. From a different angle, when I was Sunless Sea, so I
that old
designed
spooky chestnut.
The old spooky chestnut. So Sunless Sea, the game I made was Failbetter, the first actual video game that either I or Failbetter made, because Before London doesn't entirely count as a video game. Sunless Sea is structured like this: you've got London and the sea. And then you've got the sea is divided into various sub-seas, which actually started out as sort of A4 size squares on a planet, and then each of those has several islands on, and each of the islands has several stories on, and you can see where this is going. And some of the less successful bits of Sunless Sea are things like the trade, where I had a spreadsheet that showed you can make a small profit if you take this place from this place, and you learn the profit and then you schlep it around. It's not very interesting. And also the stories that only take place in the same island, or where you have some sort of make work ferrying to another. But thankfully, halfway through, I started explicitly, before ever having heard of A City's Not a Tree, I started making connections between the islands, not just connections for quest, but connections of reference. And where you find that reference, you feel less like your sort of lawn mowing content, and more like you're exploring a world, because of course the point about a world is you have connections between the two, and often when you have a map full of bits that have been done in isolation, it feels a bit more sterile. But ask me the question you're going to ask me.
Well, before I do that, I was going to say, well, that's surely one of your skills as a designer, is that you've always been very theme first, and theme strikes me as a really helpful way of uniting the tree together. Because if you say, every game needs a plan, right? I don't believe anybody sits down. I once heard somebody I really respect, and I think he's fantastic in every other way, but I did have some issues with this, and I don't know if he stands by it. Who once said that the way he designs games is he sort of waits for the inspiration to strike, and he described it as sort of ink falling down upon the page, and then he sees the big picture, and then the game forms. And to be clear, this person is probably the most successful game designer I can think of. So he's clearly got something going. But I can tell you that I think more goes into making a game than the ink falling upon the page.
Well, I think also this is the person I'm thinking of. It's that studio's work has been generally excellent, but rarely on time.
I think that's absolutely fair. Yes, I think that's correct. But it's not about him. It's more about that every game needs some sort of plan behind it, like a lattice structure, because you do need to think about the kind of basic practicalities where you can build out all the beautiful detail that makes a game a game. And I think your theme approach is a really fantastic way of getting around. The ideal sterile diagram with the human artistic response, because you can say, you do need to make sure that there are lavatories available within 20 metres of every residential area we built in this part of the city. But if you say, the theme of this city is, I don't know, tropical paradise, then that person can build that important substructure with the key idea in mind, without you having to sort of officially link it back, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I agree, and I hadn't thought about it specifically in terms of theme that way. But yeah, one of the other traps in the book I talk about is the flag of convenience, which is where you basically pass up the opportunity to make that theme flow into every part of the game. But ask me the question.
Yes, the question I'm going to ask you that you banned me from saying, and therefore I'm going to pointedly say
Yes,
on this
I will
podcast. No, not that, because COVID has a lot to say about the old marriage.
God damn it.
But you have said I cannot say this is a book about what makes games good.
Yes, I have said that.
And I read your book and I thought it was quite an interesting discussion of what makes games good. So discuss.
Good is a reductive word. I have heard cogent arguments with which I agree that Cultist Simulator is not a good game. I have also heard cogent arguments with which I agree that Cultist Simulator is a good game. And good is one of those words like art or language that people allows people to argue past each other. If you say that Cultist Simulator is an innovative game, or a repetitive game, or a low budget game, or a minimalist game, or a well written game, anybody who says it's a badly written game, I won't even fight. I'll sniff effectively. But it has properties, some of which cause people to assess it as good, and some of which don't. And of course, like all those other words, like art and what was the other one I said? Language and obscenity and there's an elephant in the room effect. Is there are games nobody would call good, and there are games that almost everyone would call good. There is no game that everyone would call good. There's no such thing exists.
But you can't be
because
saying,
my mum wouldn't call it good.
But you can't be saying that there's no criteria.
No. So that's what I'm saying. It's general, to the point where it can be counterproductive when you look into it. But also it's basically useful, which is why we use it at all. So it's pointless.
I see what you mean, because I suppose as a game designer you wouldn't sit down and write a list of things that will make the game good, would you? Because that wouldn't really make any sense.
Well, more to the point, if as a player I say I played this game and it's not good, and somebody else says I played this game and it was good, then one thing you can do is punch each other until somebody says, all right, the game is good. Another thing you can do is the person can say the game is good because it's got trees, cheese and Marmite. The other person will say, yeah, but I hate trees, cheese and Marmite. Why it's got them things.
But that's what I mean.
And so the thing about the book is I didn't want people to read it and come away thinking, or go into it thinking I'm going down to give my definitive opinion on what makes games good. I'm not. I give my quite heartfelt opinion on what qualities often make people glad they've played a game, which is quite carefully phrased,
yes,
but it's very different.
That's why I'm pushing you on it, because I think there is an element of you're right. Everything you say about the term good is sort of subjective and complicated and doesn't sort of mean anything in and of itself. But that's why it's interesting to talk about, because everybody emotionally has this go-to response of this game is good, and you go through a bunch of different types of people who play games, saying what their different prisms are. So, for example, a game reviewer has a different approach to a game designer, who has a different approach to a actual gamer who's just playing it as a consumer, and all this kind of stuff, and all of that goes into, they all mean something slightly different when they say a good game. So I think it is a very interesting endeavour, though probably impossible, to dig into what good means and what criteria we can objectively apply to explain to all of these disparate groups of people, based on this set criteria, we think this is a good game or not good game or middling game, whatever, which leads us into game criticism more generally, which is, I think you mentioned briefly, is a sort of very complicated area, because it used to be very numerical. It used to be, I give this game X out of 5 stars, and increasingly game reviewers tend to move away from this into more sort of general think pieces about, it made me feel like this, or I like this aspect of it, and I'm going to give it a sort of I recommend this or I don't, rather than a 8 out of 10 or 2 out of 10. So there is this sort of human yearning for people to be able to apply some sort of tree to art, to video games, and say, based on this set of criteria. And I think that's an interesting parallel to what the whole book is about generally, because we're saying, you can't take the sort of ideal structure and apply it to reality, and art constantly challenges you to do that. Video games say, oh, you like me, do you? Why? And then everyone goes, oh, I don't know, I just really enjoyed playing you, which is why you come down to, I'm glad I've played the game, as your sort of go-to This, I think,
You're right about all that, which is I think I point out I stole from the Stoics, because one of the things game designers do
Stoics
is they steal from elsewhere. Because one of the things about game design, even more than other software, it draws from a whole bunch of other disciplines. I mean, all disciplines.
All art. I mean, T.S. Eliot's famous thing that he stole from Picasso.
No, I agree. All art does, but a discipline where you have animation, programming, writing, sound design, game design, all together, draws more obviously from more arts than does a discipline where you put words on paper.
Touché.
Or a discipline where you make a poster. Now, of course, somebody puts words on. Eliot steals from Picasso, and a lot of writers are bridle at the idea that they don't draw from other disciplines. Of course they do. Similarly, a lot of artists would bridle at the idea that they don't consider other endeavours in their art. And again, of course they do. And I would even hesitate to say that games draws more from, really, just draws more obviously from. It's more fundamentally and apparently something that draws from a bunch of disciplines.
It's because it's more of a group endeavour. Like, one of the things that always struck me about it is that, an artist is an artist, and we go to their exhibition and we think, I like or I do not like that art. And some people who are very well educated or intelligent can say, well, I like it because of this, or I think it is good because of that. But most of us go and we think, oh, that's nice or it's not nice. But that's one person, whereas a game is very rarely made by one person alone.
We'll tell that to Weather Factory.
Well, exactly, but this is what I mean. But so you and I know better than most people that we have to put on different hats at different points in the game, because it's not like we sit down and paint until it's done. Constantly we're doing different things.
But the good thing, Ben Goldacre once said his battle cry would be... I'm sorry, who is Ben Goldacre? Ben Goldacre is he was a very influential science blogger. I think he's mostly sort of retreated from media now, and runs some sort of statistical medical project that makes sure that good data gets where it's needed. But he, back in the days when he was more often on Radio 4, he used to say that his battle cry would be, actually it's a little bit more complicated than that, which
that
isn't really a rousing battle cry. But that's how I feel with the question about being, whether it's good. Is I'm fine with people coming to the book thinking, I'm interested in the question of why some games are considered good by some people and others aren't. But I don't want to say this is a book about which games are good, because I do not and cannot expect people... I can't say definitively what makes games good. All I can do is say, here are some of the things that I think we can use to make games be... Which is, I know it sounds needlessly pedantic, but I don't want to give the impression that there's some sort of slide rule in the book that determines whether or not a game is good. No, it's a bunch of analytical tools that you can use for talking about whether people are consider it.
Though I disagree with that. I mean, which is a bold position to take with the person who wrote the book themselves. But
the author is dead. I understand.
Yeah, who cares about that guy? Okay, that's horrible.
Sorry,
that was really gross.
I didn't actually die.
Right, well, that's thrown me off. I was going to say you have 5 criteria that you land upon as a sort of 4 as a sort of leading lights, which are
attentiveness, lucidity, generosity, and the king quality or the queen quality, the quality that leans especially into the Christopher Alexander side of things is vitality. And one of the things I get more tendentious about proposing is that games which we respond well to are often games which feel like contact with another human mind, actually things which embody human qualities. You can make that case for art generally, but I think I'd be quite cautious about making it from my limited corner of the world. But you were...
But my point is that you have come up with your own criteria that you say...
No, I've said it's like... Umami was the thing. So lucidity and whatnot are equivalent of umami, the fifth sort of taste, the thing that makes things savoury. But Marmite is crammed with umami, and to me it tastes like raw sewage covered in cigarette ash. So there are no guarantees. Well, I didn't make you eat Marmite. People have made me eat Marmite, and I still speak to most of them. But that's the point: is you can't guarantee. You can't say. There's a story.
I take your point. It's a prism, not a criteria.
It is, and there's. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to bring this adage up again because I know it's not your favourite, but it's the both these people, I believe, are now dead. God rest their souls. But Jack Cohen, the reproductive biologist who used to do a lot of speculative xenobiology talks and consultancy, did some consulting or some advice for Brian Aldiss, and Brian Aldiss wrote Helliconia. And the story he told, so it's impossible to fact check this now because it was both the parties in the conversation are deceased.
All right, Boris Johnson.
He gave Brian Aldiss advice. Brian Aldiss used some of it in the Helliconia books. Then Cohen had some unkind things to say about the quality of the biology in the Helliconia books. And Aldiss rang him up apparently very crossly and said, but I put the stuff you told me to put in the books and you say it's still not biologically accurate. And he said, yeah, but you put that stuff in, but you also put other stuff in. And the other stuff didn't work with this stuff. And the other stuff you put in didn't make any sense. And Aldiss apparently disagreed. And Cohen said pungently, look, Brian, you can put piss in wine and you get piss, and you put wine in piss and you get piss. And that's the problem, is you can put umami in Marmite, but you also put, I mean, I don't know if they put piss in Marmite. I wouldn't be surprised if they did.
Stop hating on Marmite.
But you take my point, is that if I don't want to leave my house at the age of 72 and find that waiting at my garden gate is some bloke with a gun who says, listen, I believed what you said about lucidity and attentiveness and generosity and vitality. I put my life savings in a game, and everybody gave it 2 out of 10 and said it was awful. I want to be able to say to him, I probably won't say to him, look, you put wine in piss, you get pissed, but you don't say that to somebody who's waving a gun at you.
No,
you take my point.
Yes, sir. I get everything you said. I'm going away now.
I think what you say is, behind you.
I'll tell you that fun story about Dad and the Marine.
You did.
My father was once in an exercise. He was a government, he was a Foreign Office guy, diplomat, as they're known to humans who speak English. And he once had to do an exercise about, what happens if the embassy compound got, attacked by some sort of terrorist or something. And there were some Marines there, and they were hiding behind a car door, I believe, in this fake disastrous moment. And my father, who, to be clear, is not, I would say, an alpha male, he's more on the intellectual side of things, sort of leant over to this muscled young man who was in charge of the operation and said, but what do I actually do if this happens, or there's a bomb or something goes wrong? And this sort of 20-year-old looked over at this 55-year-old man and very quietly just said, what I say. And I was like, yes, I have never met somebody I would obey more. What control.
Is this slash fiction?
Okay, I have so many complicated feelings about the idea of writing slash fiction about my own father that we're not even going to discuss that. But congratulations, you've made me even more uncomfortable than...
Achievement unlocked.
Ew. Okay, well, I have to go and speak to some sort of psychotherapist about that. So, anything else you want to say about the Snare of the Tree? Other than please buy it. It's available on Kindle on Amazon, and it will be coming to our Etsy shop soon in paperback form. But anything else you want to talk about in terms of games or lattices or Christopher Alexander?
Semi-lattices.
Apparently,
so Alexander sort of said that the tree structure is the problematic one. He proposed a semi-lattice where basically the branch was drawing back.
A diamond?
No, because it opens, that's why it's a semi-lattice, not a lattice.
Oh.
So it stays open at the bottom.
Not
you can't join everything back. But there is some other term that he or some quibbling mathematician said is more appropriate than semi-lattice later, but I can't find it. But so if I've been wrong in the book, it's the internet's fault. That's it.
Right, well,
it's the internet's fault.
Through the medium of...
Don't push any counts off cliffs.
I was just going to say horrible monks losing their minds through to freeing diamonds. Read the book.
Have a spooky book.